Hey guys, welcome back to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. I'm Jazz Marie, aka Viv Navarro. So previously on the podcast, we were talking about holiday ghost stories. Yes. So if you're wondering why, listen back to that episode on Christmas spirits, right? Which is a print-based literary magazine, right? And yeah, just real quick before we get going here, towards the very end of that episode, I was sharing some movie recs as I always do, if possible, right? And I was thinking back to also, I think, growing up, another movie I used to watch, right, was The Haunted Mansion, with Eddie Murphy. That was always pretty memorable. And yeah, and just like shortly after that episode, I was thinking back, looking at the Christmas Spirits logo, right, which looks like it appears to be a crow or a raven, right? And I thought back to this memory when I was growing up, just like there was a time my folks and I, we were coming back from like a shopping trip, right? I think the grocery store, and we were in the back, area of the childhood home I grew up in, right? As a kid back in Minnesota, Minneapolis, right? And came back home. The house was covered with like nearly 100 crows, and you could barely see the house, and it was super creepy, just a bunch of crows sitting all over the house. And we were super scared to get out of the van, right? And I can't remember exactly, but I think we waited it out. I think we just waited for them to leave, or I can't remember exactly if my dad had gotten out of the van or something, but I think we just waited it out because crows can be pretty, like, it's scary. You come back and you see like a flock of crows just sitting there. I think a flock of crows is called a murder, right? Which is pretty like, but yeah, so it was sort of giving me, Birds film vibe, right? I don't know how many guys ever saw that Birds movie, right? From 1963, right? The Birds, 1963. It's pretty creepy, right? That movie, if you've never seen that movie from the 1960s, totally check it out. But bird attacks happen, guys, right? So I was like pretty just like scared, right, at that time. So that's what the logo Christmas Spirit sort of reminded me of, that moment of like, coming back and just a pack of crows like all over the house, just like sitting there. And they're all like, some of them had their heads turned towards us. You're like, this looks kind of messed up, right? Some birds have issues, guys. So it was just like pretty. It was funny and actually scary at the same time. So yeah. Anyways, so enough about birds. Let's get back into literary magazines here, right? So yeah, today we're gonna check out the Gather Lit Mag. Yeah. So yeah, I had come across them just like when I was searching online. And again, I was predominantly looking for lit mags and journals, to cover for right this upcoming holiday, right? Christmas. But yeah, they're not a Christmas literary arts magazine or anything of that nature. No. But I think when we hear the word gather, right, others coming together at a table, right, maybe for Thanksgiving or, Christmas, the holidays, right? That's something that comes to mind, right? That word a lot, everyone getting together. And I think with gather, right, the whole aspect of that also, you could think of it a sense of others getting together at a table or sitting down or collectively coming together to have discussion and share and do knowledge exchanges essentially too, or even feedback sessions at a table or of some kind. It could be virtual too, gathering together virtually. So I think they have a pretty cool lit mag. So just going to share it with you guys. Interesting setup too, in terms of their membership, and things of that nature. So when you go onto the Gather Lit Mag's site, there's actually a pop up that comes up. So I have to pull up a new window for you guys here. So, yeah, when you first land on their website, this pop up comes up on the right hand side. It says waitlist to join Gather, right? And it states Gather is a writing community for bold, gutsy poets. They are currently full. Join the waitlist to get an invite when spots open up. So, just to clarify, this is like an additional membership waitlist thing, right? And yeah, so it's not tied to per se, right, saying you have to wait to submit to them. No, they do have, again, general submission windows, right? They have, which I'll share here in a little bit, different types of calls, So, yeah, you just want to keep that in mind. This could be, I think, this pop up, if you're seeing my screen again out on YouTube, Spotify, and elsewhere, could be maybe confusing to others who maybe aren't aware of what, the Gather membership is, unless they were to dig further into their website and read more, right? So that's the only thing. This is a pop up made with Tally, which I've covered in the podcast a bit, right? Tally Forms, and it's a form builder, right? And yeah, so yeah, again, it just asks, for your name, your email address, your writing goals, and then you join their, wait list for their membership, right? And things of that nature, right? The community, right? That they have, the Gather writing community. And there are additional benefits with being part of the Gather writing community and things of that nature. We'll go to the community section in a little bit here too. But yeah, so if I close out this pop up, right, just scroll up and hit the X, right? And yeah, and also at the top, I don't know if you guys can see this, but it says on a black banner at the very top, right, Gather opens January 7th, join the waitlist. So again, if we click on that, that just takes you out to their forum, right? It says join the waitlist to be notified when spots open. And yeah, so we'll come back to the community section to talk about the membership in a bit here. But in terms of Gather itself, we're going to head over to the Gather Chill Subs overview page just to share a little bit more about it, right, with you guys to start off. So this is the overview page on Chill Subs. I'm scrolling down and going to quote this off. So Gather was founded in 2025, just this year, actually. So Gather is a brand new lit mag publishing poets on Instagram and Substack. So you don't have to choose between a banger on the gram and a published poem, it states here. They are a social lit mag and they publish collaboratively to share their online reach with you. So yeah, they publish 4 poems a month on Instagram at Gather Poets, which is their Instagram handle, and then 2 from their Gather community, and 2 from their general submissions. So 2 and 2, right? And then yeah, so that's a pretty interesting, format or cap they have. 2 from their Gather community, and then 2 from their general submissions window, which are open to everyone, right? And yeah, so again, they looks like are based out of Canada. I saw 2 different city locations in Canada on CLMP, but they were founded out of Canada. And yeah, on the masthead there is Maria Geistbrecht. I apologize if I mispronounced last name. That is Giesbrecht. And then Isabel Correa is the managing editor, and Will Alberts is the poetry editor. And on their website, we'll head over and look at some more of the sections there in terms of the masthead too. So yeah, it is right showing a $5 fee. However, I want to clarify this, right? So they do have fee-free reading windows, right? So we'll take a look at that in a little bit here. So I think it would be beneficial, if Chill Subs had a hover or additional note of some kind that could, pop up here, similar to like right when you do a hover on response time, to mention any notes about fee-free windows. And aside from that, because I think someone may come across this and be like, oh, they charge a fee always, right? But they do have some fee-free reading windows, right? So yeah, their acceptance rate is 11.54%. And yeah, that's what it's showing as currently. And I'm sure this will change over time since they were founded, this year. And they have a payment that they give to accepted work. So it is $35 Canadian, right? 35 Canadian dollars. And I think that conversion rate, I could be wrong, but I think it's like currently right 25 bucks, right? USD, or it could be 20 bucks, 25 bucks. I'm not exactly sure. You could, of course, do the conversion. But yeah, the response time is showing here, right? Editor reported data 90 days, and then Chill Subs Tracker stats, right? So 44 days is the average response time logged. Yeah, so they do accept simultaneous submissions, and yeah, they appeared on a collection with Chill Subs, right, where the cool kids are submitting these days. And they do, it says publish reprints. So there may be some things around that, that could maybe apply to, personal poems out on a site, someone has a writer or their social media channels, possibly. We'll have to see what that entails. Sometimes that's what it means, or, things of that nature. That doesn't necessarily mean previously published work, right? So I think, again, it'd be beneficial of chill subs to have a hover on these fields here, maybe one day. But yeah, so we're gonna head over to, right, their calls in a little bit and check that out. But if we go to stats, right, you can see these aren't all by any means all the submission track to date, right? So we're seeing accepted 3, rejected 23, 18 pending, 1 withdrawn, and yeah. So yeah, I think it's saying there was 0.1% solicited works, and yeah, max response time again 90 days. So yeah, the calls, right, on chill subs, we'll head over to their submittable, right, the guideline page too. But yeah, it says unconfirmed here, so I think they just, the editor has to go in and confirm these just so it shows up as like open calls rather than in the unconfirmed status, and that happens sometimes. But yeah, they are actually open at this very moment, yeah. And I think it's actually their fee-free reading window is closing very soon here. But they do have, opportunities, it looks like, always open, but outside of their fee-free window, right, there's a fee, right, of $5, it looks like. So I guess I could read the guidelines from chill subs for you guys too, but uh, they state, right, they typically want, poems that make them float, fly, dance, and maybe even spit out their coffee, right? So it looks like they are permitting one piece at a time overall, right, for their calls currently. And yeah, general, I guess I can open these for you guys so you can take a look and see, right? So yeah, you can see, yeah, so they do have fee-free reading windows from time to time. These just weren't, I think, again, the editor just has to go in and confirm these, but they are currently open. If you go out to Duotrope and compare, right, yeah, so they are open right now, and this was actually updated, just if you scroll all the way to the bottom on Duotrope, right, their listing, right? It was last updated December 1st, right? 2025. So very recently, right? And yeah, today's the 4th when I'm doing this episode. So yeah, it was just literally updated a few days ago. And yeah, again, it just reiterates all the guidelines on Duotrope typically, and it seems to be accurate and current on Duotrope right now. But again, you should always follow what's on the site, typically, yeah, and their guidelines and maybe their submission man system. So again, they are an online publication. However, they have some really cool news that I'll share with you guys that I found out too, in terms of branching outside of being solely online. So let's go back to their website here, and yeah, let's head over to their submissions page, and then we'll talk about the gathered community a little bit here too. So yeah, submit on submittable. So when you go out there and click on that, right, and it's going to take you to their right submittable page, right? I had it up as a window already. So yeah, so their current free reading period, and I'd seen this on social media too. Again, I think if someone were to come across that waitlist pop up, it could be potentially confusing to them. So, yeah, I think it might be good if they have a note there saying, but check out our other windows if you are, not a Gather member, right? Or they have, again, a window where there's a free reading period, right? December 1st to December 10th currently, right? So it ends in 6 days here, 9 p.m. for me, right? And yeah, so they have, right, a free reading period, general submissions, and then they have Gather member submissions, right? Always open, always free. So just to clarify that, right? I think, again, that may just, want to have an additional note in that tally form, that pop up, because when I initially saw that, I was kind of confused. I was like, is there a wait list to submit, right? That crossed my mind. I think that ever crosses your mind, that could deter others from, maybe proceeding further, or confusing that, or getting mixed up. But in either sense, most typically dig through a website first a little bit further, and you should always do that before submitting to a place. Check it out, read through everything to, understand that, a bit further. So again, they are, stating, right, they publish bold and gutsy poetry from emerging and established writers worldwide. So they are, open to international submissions, which is really cool to see. And I don't see anything about age restrictions or limits, anything of that nature on their site. So yeah, there have been very few, I would say, lit magazine journals founded out of Canada and other places too that accept international submissions or specify that. So I really love to see that they do outright state that, right. Worldwide international submissions are welcome, right. So that's great to see. And yeah, so we're going to take a look here at these calls real quick. So yeah, I have it up right now in another window. Let me pull it up so you can see sort of side by side. So yeah, love the split view now that we have the ability to do. I think that's so cool. Anyways, so yeah, on my left hand side on my screen, if you're watching again on YouTube or Spotify, right? So elsewhere, where I do the screen shares, right? So there is the general submissions free reading period, right? December 1st to December 10th again, right? Ends in 6 days here. Now, you can see right here, they said this is the form for use for general submitters, non-gather members during their free reading period spanning, right? So I think they didn't, update this. This is possibly, right, their past free reading period that they had, which was September 1st to September 10th. So yeah, it looks like they do more than one, free reading period, throughout the year was from what I'm getting. But I think it'd be nice to specify if these are recurring free reading windows, because it wasn't apparent to me when exactly they have calls typically open, or in terms of like the exact free reading periods, right? Of course, they have right on the right hand side, you can see, right, the gather member submissions are always open, always free. But I think it'd be nice to know if these are reoccurring windows that they have. Is it always December 1st, December 10th? Is it always September 1st, September 10th, or certain months across the year, like the first week or so, So that's the only thing. So, 10 days, yeah, some lit magazine journals do this. They have a first week of the month, or some months where it's a free reading period, no fees at all, right, for others to submit, and it's open to everyone. So yeah, I think it's nice to have windows like this, but of course I prefer having zero fees, completely, right. It's really hard to get to a point to do that, but I mentioned some other things lit magazine journals can do to offset cost in some of the other episodes and articles I've typed, right. And yeah, every lit mag journal is structured a little bit differently. Everyone in terms of the lit mag world, there are different operational expenses, and Gather seems to do a lot of other things too, that I'll share a little bit later. But yeah, so it says, please send one poem only again, and they accept previously uncurated work, right? So the exception is published on personal social media sites is fine. Simultaneous submissions are fine. It says no need to mention it. However, please use the withdraw button in Submittable to withdraw your poem if it's accepted elsewhere. They typically publish poems with no more than 30 lines for formatting purposes online, and it states if they have declined your submission, you may submit again in 1 month. And so yeah, they do have a preferred waiting time. If your submission's been declined, they said please just wait a month before you submit again. So not submitting back to back times every time you get a decline, from them, right? And yeah, that's something to think about, if you start your own Lit Matter journal, right? How long do you want others to wait, preferably before trying again to a call you just have open, right? If the window's still open, how long before they can try again? And yeah, so general submissions response time is showing, when they expect a decision, right, to get back from general submissions to others, right, is 4 to 6 months. They do have an expedited response option, it looks like, right? 1 week, 5 business days. And yeah, so again, they pay $35 Canadian, right, per poem, and purchase first electronic rights and first North American rights. They interview all poets on their Substack and occasionally invite selected poets on their Gather Poets podcast, which is cool. So yeah, they do have a podcast channel, which we'll take a look in a little bit here, out on YouTube and I think Spotify. So yeah, you can see the required fields for, again, the general submissions free reading period, right? December 1st through December 10th. They require the submission name, right? Your email address, cover letter and bio, your poem, right? Again, one poem at a time, a Word doc or PDF. And yeah, so we can see at the very bottom here, it says, would you like to add on expedited response or feedback on how to improve your poem. And then there's a checkbox optional, right, which says, yes, please, I'd like to receive a response in 2 weeks, which is $10. And then beneath that is, I'd love detailed line by line feedback from one of the editors on my poem, which is showing $35. Yeah. So, yeah, totally. Some lit magazine journals have this expedited response or feedback option, and yeah, I know again, some find the expedited fast track response, a quick decision, unethical, right? To skip the line, or wait time. Some writers absolutely do not, like waiting, several months for a decision. They like to have a speedy decision. They like to skip that wait time. And yeah, it's hard. Lit magazine journals have to be creative in the sense of ways to offset costs, to cover expenses for things. It could be, some lit mags, right? I think Gather does retreats and other things, which we'll share here in a bit. And yeah, so every late night journal has, typically bills of some kind. It's tough, but yeah, I see a lot of lit magazine journals do additional feedback services, for from the editors. And it looks like they do line by line feedback. Some lit magazine journals, right, they give like a certain cap amount of pages of feedback to, and things like that, 1 to 2 pages or something. At the lit mag I run, right, Dippy, right, yeah, we have, that expedited response option. I used to have it where it was, within 3 days or pretty fast, like next day decision, which I called the tomorrow people ticket. But, I discontinued that sort of wording because it no longer is, that fast. It's 1 to 2 weeks now, within. So just renamed it. Some lit magazine journals nicknamed their fast response option. And, yeah, so it's just called a splash pass now at Dippity, right? Skip the line and get a fast decision. And yeah, some writers totally, we've seen, have used that expedited response option to get a fast decision. And some things lit magazine journals also do is, again, sharing feedback, right? Additionally, or even reader comments, or sharing score reveals, things of that nature, right? So it's really up to you, if you're starting your lit mag journal, what you want to do there. And I think submitters, right, yeah, some submitters do like these options, but some absolutely don't. Or some, I know, founders of systems and stuff like that find some of these things unethical, specifically, right, the expedite response option. But yeah, the lit mag I run, we do have that option. And I prefer to get rid of anything like that. But I discontinued fees at the lit mag I run Dippity right back in the summer, and we just have, again, fees at Dippity Press. But it's tough. You got to be creative again. With the lit mag and journal, like offering additional services is a great way to cover and offset cost and operational expenses. I think also, something I mentioned in, a post recently, right, was that, some lit magazine journals also offer advertisement opportunities, right? Maybe on their website or even in issues of things of that nature. Gather, is online, right? But they are, again, actually diving into print, right? Anthologies of that nature. So I'll share that in a little bit here. But yeah, so that's the free fee reading period. It's closing pretty soon here. So again, I think whenever a place does this, I think it'd be nice to clarify, when's the, next free reading period after this, or when are their typical free reading periods? Is it always September, December, or is it different times across the year, right? And then I think just a note here, right, with any, additional optional fees and services, right? Are these fees, non-refundable, right? So, I don't think I saw that on their website, or maybe I missed it. So I don't think I saw that on their website in terms of, are these fees non-refundable? Like, what happens if, again, the 2 week response time, like what happens again if the 2 week response time isn't met? I know some lit magazine journals offer refund, and some, have a no refund policy, and things like that. So always a good idea to have that. And then again, how are poets paid, right? I don't think I saw that on their website. Submittable, right, on the back end, for lit magazine journals that are on the CLMP membership. Gather Lit Mag is a member of CLMP, by the way. And the thing about submittable, they don't, a lot of lit magazine journals can't use that award feature that they have, there are quite a few features that you have to upgrade to or you cannot use because they're to upgrade is just simply too high and expensive. So I think that's a disadvantage with Submittable, and a lot of things there in terms of some things where you constantly run into, oh, you have to upgrade or this feature isn't available to you on, the most basic plan of CLMP, right? So again, that's why I left and moved over to Subfolio because you get a lot more features. I feel like with Subfolio, but that's just me personally. Again, it covered a number of alternatives to Submittable on this podcast, but yeah. Anyways, let's check out the right hand side now. Let's go over to the Gather member submissions, always open, always free. So it states here, right? So the submission window, this one on the right hand side, I have up on my screen, right? And I'm just sharing it side by side so you guys can see. I think it's easier. So, if you are not a member, it says please use the general submission forms, right? That was the other one on the left hand side, right? That I was just sharing with you guys. So, to join Gather, it says visit their website. The details are there, right? They have that wait list and the additional community membership details, which we'll cover in a little bit here. It says please send one poem only. Yeah, so it's pretty much the same guidelines, right? As the general submissions window. The only difference is this call is for their members, right? Only, right? Always open, always free. And yeah, so um, the thing it says here that it notes, right? If you have an accepted submission, right, it says please wait 12 months before submitting again. And again, just a reminder, right? Whenever they decline your submission, they says please wait 1 month before submitting again. So yeah, some lit magazine journals, I think that's a good idea to have, some sort of policy in place, in terms of like how often can others submit to calls, after getting an acceptance, right? I think it's a good idea to state something like that, but with the lit mag I ran, right, totally, we had some poets and writers, partake in more than one issue and multiple calls, and things like that, as much as they wanted to, in terms of trying again at the time, back then when we started. And I think with presses, though, it's especially important, I think, to have some sort of wait time, with chapbooks and things of that nature, like, at least a year, so you're not, publishing, right, the same writers over and over again, others like, it allows, other writers to partake, right, to see new voices and writers, right? Not, if, someone were to read your lit journal and they see the same names over and over again, I don't really think that is necessarily right. It's not the best thing to do, right? You want to give others a chance, right? Not the same writers over and over again appearing back to back times, right? So you want to think about that when you're starting your lit journal, right? A wait time of some kind, in terms of maybe with accepted work and maybe not. I know some lit journals allow others to partake as much as they want. Some totally, online and print lit mags have regular contributors to issues and things of that nature online too. So it's not, absolutely necessary, but I think it's good to specify that, any policies in terms of, waiting after decline or waiting time, after an acceptance, so keep that in mind. Yeah. So again, yeah, it's pretty much the same, in terms of, right, the guidelines and things, everything except general submissions, right? Response time is showing 1 to 2 months, right, for their Gather member submissions call window. It's stating here, right? And yeah, again, they pay 35 Canadian dollars per poem, and it has the same, thing I just stated earlier in terms of, first North American rights, first electronic rights, right? And again, they interview all poets on their Substack and partake. They invite, selected poets according to their schedule on their Gather Poets podcast, which we'll check out in a bit here too. So yeah, they have a required checkbox you can see for, confirming whether you are a member of the Gather writing community, a third person bio, right, submission name, right? So it looks like that bio on the member form is not showing as required though. And then submission name required, your poem name required, and yeah. So for the Gather members call submission bucket here, right? So it says, would you like an expedited response? So yeah, that's also open to, their Gather members, right, as well. So it says, no thank you or yes please, right? So it's $10, right? Same thing on the other, general submissions form. And yeah, again, it's stating, right, others for their gather members will get a, 1 to 2 response time. They have the option to get an extra response 10 business days again. And the difference here, just noting this, so if you're looking for feedback on your poem and you're a gather member, it says please post in the sharing and feedback section in their members portal to receive feedback for free. So yeah, they have a dedicated members portal to receive feedback for free. And I think that's interesting, so totally. Some lit magazine journals on this podcast I've covered, right, have, facilitated a membership portal of some kind or a separate space for additional things that are maybe paywalled or members only access. Right. Again, a prime example of, a members portal, if you listen back to episode, I think it was 80 with Only Poems, or if you search up, Only Poems on this podcast, right, I shared, right, Only Poems had a membership portal too. They call theirs Third Space, right? And they have some things that are for members only access, some different membership tiers, right? And yeah, so I highly recommend looking back at that episode, to see that membership portal. And yeah, it may be beneficial to you. I think they were using Ghost, right? A template of some kind to facilitate that membership access portal. And there's some pretty cool things that they do there, some bonus things. I saw open mic and stuff of that nature, right? And, yeah, you could facilitate, a separate space for, membership feedback, or those who want to get, feedback, on their work. Additionally, right, and yeah, so we'll take a look further at Gather's membership and community section here, but in terms of their feedback, so they have some pretty cool stats on their social media feed on this. So on Instagram, right, I have their feed pulled up separately elsewhere, but just quoting this off for you guys. So just the other day, they did Gather Wrapped, which is, akin to what we see with like Spotify Wrapped, just an end of the year summary, which is fun to do. I've done end of the year summaries like that, with my own lit mag. I don't know if I have time to do one this year, but I absolutely will try maybe. So, anyways, Gather, right, so yeah, it states here, just quoting this, right, over 950 poems were posted in their members only portal for feedback. That's a lot. And over 7,000 pieces of feedback were given on those poems, right? So it's showing 7,070 comments from their screenshot. And they had, it says, over 100 events in Gather over the year, right, with over 2,000 RSVPs. They completed 102 events. So they do events and other things of that nature. And they have a lot of, you know, uh, members of the Gather community, it looks like, commenting actively, helping others, and yeah, and yeah, and giving feedback. It absolutely looks like they are doing that and sticking to their word on that. So, yeah, in terms of their members only portal and really trying to help others, I think feedback in terms of, right, poetry is very valuable to have, and to get honest feedback on your work. And yeah, so yeah, I think Gather has a very unique structure, in terms of that. I don't see a ton of lit magazine journals have membership portals, but they absolutely are out there, right, with Only Poems. And yeah, I don't know what Gathers looks like, or, really what their portal is or what they're using for that. But it sounds cool, and awesome what they've established, thus far. And they just launched, right, this year, it looks like, right? So that's pretty cool. I think they've covered a lot of ground in their first year, thus far. So let's head back over to the Gather Lit Mag website, right? So we're going to check out the community section here, right? So it says, welcome to Gather, right? A home for poets, right? And again, they emphasize, as always, right, community of gutsy, bold writers who explore the edges of their craft in the company of their poetry people. So it looks like this is the editor in chief here, right, Maria? And yeah, so I think if you click on it, right, it takes you out to Maria's website, right? The editor in chief, founding editor, and yeah. So I typically don't read EIC's bios a bunch. If it's a rather small team, or I do sometimes, if I can, might as well just read. So it states here Maria is a poet born in Durango, Mexico, and immigrated to Canada, with her family when she was 4 years old. Her poems have found homes in the Literary Review of Canada, Queen's Quarterly, Grain, Contemporary Verse 2, Only Poems, and elsewhere. also, Maria recently won the 2025 Jack McCarthy Award. And yeah, so it looks like Maria also has an upcoming publication, right, or book, A Little Feral, right, Bloody 2026. So yeah, a poetry collection that is coming up with Right Bloody Publishing in May 2026. So that's awesome. Yeah, so that's Maria Geisbrecht. I'm so sorry if I mispronounce the last name. And yeah, so we're going to go back here to the Gather community section. When we scroll down further, right, it says here in a section, right, how can I join as a question, right? So Gather runs in 12-week rounds, it states, right? Their next round opens January 7th, 2026. All waitlist members will receive the invite to join via email on January 7th at 9 a.m. Eastern. The demand to join is high, so it says please set an alarm. Spots fill within an hour usually. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. I don't really, myself know exactly what that entails. I've never done anything like that myself. The only time I've really ever joined a wait list, right, I think most of us have, is for, a new software service that's about to come out, right? That type of wait list. But it sounds cool, what the Gather community is doing, or what the Gather membership strives to do, Gather and the membership, overall. It looks like they have guest workshops coming up. So winter 2026 guest workshops, a two-part workshop series with Ellen Bass, right, called Controlled Chaos, the long arm poem with Ellen Bass. And yeah, I've seen also on social media on their feed, they've had some events even tied to where the importance of a poem title, even things like that, that they cover, and yeah, so it seems like they're really about knowledge exchange and helping others, through, right, the Gather community, essentially, right? And I think workshops absolutely are beneficial, right? Only Poems does this too, right? They hold additional workshops, additional sessions for others to attend. And Only Poems has membership tiers again, and additional fees for other services too. So it is another way, I think, for lit magazine journals to offset cost and to fund more projects and things of that nature too. With additional services and series. Yeah, so why join Gather, right? So it states here dedicated time to write, right? So Maria, the EIC founding editor, right, hosts a weekly generative writing session led with creative writing prompt, ample writing time and sharing. You can choose to attend either Sunday morning session 11 a.m. 12 to 12 p.m. Eastern time, and Monday evening session 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern time. And yeah, so you get valuable feedback on your writing. And Gather, they host a monthly feedback hour where you can receive live feedback on your poems from the editor in chief and other talented poets at the table. You'll also have ongoing support in their feedback and sharing space in their members only portal. So you can learn from visiting award-winning poets. Every month, they host guest poets to teach craft workshops. In the past, they have had poets like Danusha Lamaris, Jane Hirschfield, Timothy Green, and Chen Chen have visited. New members gain access to these past recorded workshops. And another additional benefit of being a member, right? So you gain access to their entire Gather video library. So you can rewatch every single generative writing session that Maria has taught and every workshop that has taken place in Gather, including the guest poets mentioned previously, which is a value considered of $2,500. So that's awesome. They've created, it looks like, essentially a great library of all of the writing sessions and also the workshops. So really, they've established, almost you could consider it like a knowledge base and a place of a separate video library, and things like that that others can view. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool and unique. I don't see a lot of lit magazine journals really do that. So, yeah, it says publishing guidance and opportunities. Many poets at the table have gone on to publish poems in reputable lit mags and publish their own full length collections. And yeah, so again, they have a reminder, join the waitlist, and then they have some testimonials from some current members, which is always nice to see, to see what others thought about, the workshops, the gather community, and everything, right? So, yeah, they do have an FAQ page. Now, I do wish this FAQ page was in their, upper menu navigation, because had I come across that pop up and, not dug around on the site further, scrolled further down, it's possible to miss this, right? So I think it'd be nice if they had this FAQ section centrally in their navigation menu, with also FAQs tied to not just the Gather community, but also, the general submission guidelines and some of the things tied to that, like, are, fees, non-refundable, and yeah, and just again, some things tied to, what their typical windows are, and the fee free reading periods, and what their payment system is that they're using, to facilitate payments out to poet for accepted work, things of that nature, for that, like a central FAQ section. Yeah, maybe have this just relocated to the main navigation menu, because I think it's possible some may miss this so they don't scroll further and further down, but yeah. So again, they just reiterate, what Gather is. Again, community writers, right? Dedicated, growing, expanding the craft, enjoying sweet communion with other like-minded writers. They meet via Zoom weekly. So they are leveraging Zoom for these, community sessions, virtual too, so others can join in wherever they may be located. Gather writing circles are offered in 12-week sessions. Their next cohort will open on January 7th, 2026. And yeah, so it says, how do you know if this community will be right for you, right? So it states here, if you are a student of language, open-minded, and willing to support other writers alongside you, Gather is for you. The writing community will softly push you to write outside of your comfort zone. Gather might not be a good fit if you're looking for a place to promote your projects, or if you're unwilling to give and receive support to and from the talented writers creating alongside you. So yeah, you have to be open to feedback. You have to be open to your work, getting chopped up in general whenever you're joining, anything in terms of feedback, getting feedback from others, or, dissecting work and things like that. And yeah, it's important to, be receptive to, constructive criticism and feedback, right? And yeah, for things like that, right? I think, I totally have had some friends in the writing community, or even growing up, I had some friends that I circled back to, that, had attended some writing circles, writing workshops, and they said they got a lot out of it. They enjoyed it, So, whether it be, virtual like this or in person, right? I think workshops are absolutely valuable to attend. I know some writers absolutely do get a lot out of them. I personally haven't attended any myself, but I know some friends I've had, growing up, over times, that are passionate about writing have attended, workshops and events, like at the Loft, back in my home state, and things of that nature. So, yeah, I think, you see the testimonials from these poets and writers, and, you see the stats, it seems like they're actively, doing a good job of like facilitating this, the support and knowledge exchange essentially, and other events and, topics, right, they're covering. So again, right, they do have set times for these events, as I covered earlier, so I'm not going to repeat this, right? You can see it on my screen as well. Yeah. And then how many poets are in Gather, right? So it says at any given moment, there are usually around 50 to 90 poets at the table. And yeah, that is the set number, right? And the editor in chief states, right, they want each poet's poems to be deeply cared for and tended to, which is why they accept so few new writers each round, right? So yeah, is there a payment plan? Okay, so there is $499 for the 12-week round. So Gather is offered either as a one-time payment or three equal monthly installments, right? So yeah, I think this again should be further up higher in their navigation menu, or even, I think if someone were to see that wait list and not really and be sure of like what the Gather, community entails, things like that, they may not be aware, right? There is a payment plan for it, right? So I think it'd be a good idea to have this further up on their site and the FAQ section collectively with like, yeah, you could do one separate from submission guidelines, submit work section, and FAQ on the right gathered community, right, and how it works and the events and time schedule and payment plans. But I think it's nice to have on a site a collective FAQ page at least, or somewhere, with the submission guidelines and, you know, things of this nature too, in terms of additional memberships and plans and things of that nature. So it says the rate at which you join Gather will never change if you stay at the table, as rates for new members increase, right? To keep paying guest speakers fairly. Yeah, sometimes the rate goes up, and yeah. So the promise is, right, to write whoever the writer may be, the poet, right, is that yours never will. So yeah, yeah, so it looks like they do pay guest speakers, right? They're doing that, and then on top of other things, for facilitating this, right? And yeah, so $499, and yeah, it looks like a 12-week round. So yeah, I don't know if they have anything in terms of discounts, or anything in terms of those who can't afford that. So that is something to keep in mind. I know some lit magazine journals have some things where they permit some to write a letter, to indicate, right, in terms of, right, the cost maybe is outside of their ballpark, right? And yeah, some lit magazine journals have, fee waivers, right? Example, or there are some workshops and events I know where others, express the whole aspect of not being able to afford it, and sometimes they still get to partake in workshops. But I don't see anything mentioned like that. I don't know if they'll ever do anything like that, in terms of others who can't afford that, membership. But yeah, these workshops and events, are, I think, absolutely valuable. Gaining knowledge in the space of, growing as a writer, a poet, I think is absolutely important. And the whole aspect of community, and chatting with others, or whether it be an in-person table or not, right? They're doing Zoom calls, virtual. I think that is valuable, right? And they have some really cool, it looks like, guest speakers, and others heading workshops and events. So totally, yeah. um yeah, so that would be my only comment on that. Obviously not everyone may be able to afford $499 for a 12-week round. Yeah, so I think, yeah, over time, attending workshops, events across various months, right? It looks like they have it on Sundays, right? And then, special events and workshops on Saturdays, right? Generative writing sessions on Sundays at, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern time, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern time on Mondays. And, right, special events and workshops with guest speakers usually take place in the evenings around 7 p.m. Eastern, or at noon on Saturdays Eastern time. So yeah, 12-week round, there is a value, that they're giving, right? The different workshops and events. I think if you're really keen on, doing that, if that interests you, or you're someone who loves workshops, yeah, then by all means, this may be something you're interested in. And I think, the whole aspect of gathering together community is absolutely important, in general. I think a lot of lit magazine journals, yeah, they have essentially, communities, right? Others who have maybe followed a lit mag journal since the day it was born, and have really, felt, that community aspect of the lit mag journal sense. Not necessarily a membership, like Gather, but there is that whole, aspect of community with lit mags and journals, right? And the poetry community in general is, of course, awesome, guys. You know that. And yeah, so anyways, I think this is interesting. Again, some lit mags and journals do this, additional memberships, that have some bonus things, right? Workshops, events, being able to chat with others, right? I think, who also love what you love, right? Writing poetry, right, is valuable. And feedback, being able to get honest feedback on your work, I think is important. So yeah, so it says, what makes the table so special, right? Gather is an internationally small, intimate writing community, right? So again, they have a 50 to 90ish mark, right? So it's not like several hundreds or thousands people, in these sessions, right? It's 50 to 90ish, right? They have a cutoff point here, right? To have it, be small and intimate, right? Again, you're receiving valuable feedback from the editor in chief, and one of their poetry mentors. It looks like they have various poetry mentors too. And yeah, their wait list is stating, right, they've had over 1,600 members, so that's a lot, right? And yeah, so yeah, so again, right, it says become a part of the community. Yeah. So yeah, so it looks like here they do specify, right, again, access to their poetry mentor program where you're paired with a poet alumni for additional support, access to the entire workshop library, including workshops by poets mentioned above. But yeah, a $2,500 plus value. You get exclusive discounts to their partners, the Forever Workshop and Only Poems. Yeah. So yeah, I mentioned Only Poems again, right? They have not the identical setup, but if I recall right, they have again membership structure tiers at Only Poems too, and a membership portal over there. So yeah, so yeah, that's pretty interesting. Yeah. So yeah, that's the gather community, the FAQ. And again, I was reading through the testimonials, and it seems, yeah, they've absolutely have been supportive to others and have helped others a lot. Even diving back into poetry, and I think a lot of writers, right, poets, right, it's nice to again have that a space where you can discuss and chat with others, and get really again feedback on your work. I think it's important, right, to grow as a writer. If you're someone who again keeps maybe getting declines in the lit mag world or publication space, and you want to maybe I think in order to, if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're not going to have different results, right? So when you open your work up to feedback, right, you can think about, ways to, refine your work, make revisions to it, change it, or, grow from that feedback. Of course, constructive feedback, right? No one should outright say, right, your work sucks or is bad. That's not feedback, right? So really deep, in-depth feedback, from other fellow writers, poets, or others who've had experience, right, themselves quite a bit, I think is absolutely valuable to gain and get. But yeah, so that's the gathered community. So they have a current members section here, right? So we can see, right, the poetry mentor section, right? Isabel Correa, who is also, right, the managing editor, and yeah, so it looks like they have international team here, right? Yeah, and poetry mentors too. So yeah, so that's cool, and they have, when the members joined, right? I think too, members since January 2024. So yeah. So I think actually, right, on Chill Subs, right, was the founding date actually not 2025? Is that what I'm seeing here? So it's saying it was founded in 2025, but I think we go out to, right, the directory of publishers on CLMP, and right, see details, and I couldn't find it just in a general search, so yeah, so I think it says the year established 2025, but it looks like they've had, members going back to 2024, it looks like. So yeah, so the gather community has existed for some time, it looks like, is what I'm seeing, right? It says members since 2024, 2024, right? So maybe the this started you know in a sense differently, right? I'm seeing the founding date showing 2025, but members since 2024. So that was one thing that I just noticed. But anyways, yeah. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly when the Gather membership itself started, but maybe it's 2024. Is that what I'm seeing? I think. So yeah, it possibly started earlier, and then maybe they dove into the launch of the literary magazine is what I'm thinking, but I could be wrong on that was just something I was noticing, right? The founding date and the member since year was different, right? Yeah, so Gather Literary Magazine, right? So again, we covered the submit section, and if we go to the read section, right? So there's something exciting here, right? So the Gather anthology is happening, guys. So right, their first print anthology is actually, it says coming soon, and it actually is, I think, coming this month, right? December 2025. Let's head over to their Instagram channel here. So I'm not signed in or anything like that, but I'll just, scroll down, and you can see, yeah, on Instagram, it looks like they have nearly 8,000 followers. And, I'm not all for one to focus on numbers and things like that, but, yeah, I think it's cool. Some lit mags journals do have, some great success with sharing on social media and establishing and building out posts and sharing those, on there, right? They publish, right, poems not just on Substack, right, and gather lit mag, but also on Instagram and social media. And no, you don't necessarily need to leverage social media to be a lit mag, or anything like that, but it can be a great additional place to share, to get eyes on others' work, or to keep others updated and informed. Not everyone's using the same channel, to stay in the loop on things. So it's always a good idea to, leverage more than one platform, or, publish and post poems. A lot of lit mags and journals use, Substack as an extension, right, of their lit mag and journal, or do what Gather does, right? They have a Substack dedicated to those poems and additional, right, interviews or Q&As with poets, with their pieces, which I'll share in a bit here, right? So here's the Gather anthology that they were talking about. You can see, right, and that's pretty cool. So I think it's not just selected poems, but they also have some essays in it too, which is really cool. So yeah. So yeah, that looks like coming December 2025. So that's really cool that they're diving into print and anthologies now. So again, a lot of writers and poets in the community, they like picking up print copies too, is what I've seen. So totally, you can start off doing, solely online, and then sort of dive into print or anthologies if you'd like, or create a print series of some kind with your lit mag or journal if you're going to start one up. Yeah, so again, you can see the Gather Wrap post I was talking about. This is where I was quoting off, the feedback stats they had, right, and events and stuff. And yeah, and they nominate for Pushcart, right? They have their 2025 Pushcart nominations. It looks like up posted here, and yeah, so yeah, that's the thing. I think on their website I didn't really see specified, right, the nomination events. I don't know if it's on their Substack somewhere, but yeah, I think it's always a good idea on the website to also share, or even on Substack, like a nomination section to keep tabs on that, not just on social media publicly, but the nomination events, even an FAQ section of some kind that specifies like what events you nominate for. And I think Chill Subs does have a field for that, but I don't see it here on their page, right, that they nominate for events. So I wouldn't have known that unless I, you'd come across, right, their social media Instagram feed here, that they do nominate work, right, for some events that take place, right, yeah, across the year. So yeah, I don't know if they do other nomination events, but that's the one that's showing up here, the most current one that they've done, I think. Yeah. And yeah, you can see they have the call for submissions post they do, and then again they do, post again the poem on social media too, not just out on Substack, right? And what they do essentially is, right, a joint post between the poet and, their Gather, right, poets account on Instagram, right? So a joint post. And yeah, so again, I think it is a good idea to, if you're lit mag nowadays, to leverage social media. You don't necessarily have to the extent of, if you don't want to post poems out there, but I think, some, poets in the community, I know myself, we sort of don't really heavily post as much as, personally myself too, as much as we used to out on social media, because of the whole, AI content scraping, AI training thing that happens on platforms. Like Substack has an opt out, thing, and some platforms do, but with Instagram, you really don't have that. And yeah, it's pretty hard to escape, AI training over art and, writing and that content scraping that happens. But there are ways to minimize, like, your how much of, your exposure to that. It's hard nowadays, in terms of that, but I think, still that shouldn't prevent others, or even lit magazine journalists, from sharing awesome work out on social media and things like that. I think, there's a lot of problems, nowadays with the whole AI training, on platforms, just content scraping and stuff, and things of that nature. So I hope things get better, over the years with that. But anyways, regardless of that, I think it's awesome, what Gather Poets is doing here, right, sharing on not just Substack, but also social media, doing both sides. And again, what they do, right, is post on Substack, right? So this is their Substack. You can take a look here, right? And the post I just showed you, right, on their Substack, you can see here, right? Don't Make Me Beg for This, right, is also on their Substack here, right? A poem by Octavia Knight. So let's just click into one of these as an example, right? I'm not signed in or anything right now, but yeah. So this is what it looks like, right? It looks like they, right, have a Substack post right here with it. And what they do here, right, they have, right, the, it looks like, in another program, they type out the poem to retain the formatting of it. The thing about Substack, guys, so it's hard sometimes, right? Even with the poetry block feature, right, on Substack, it's not the best, right? So sometimes lit mags and journals, even myself, have done this from time to time. Sometimes you have to type out you have to have the poem, formatted elsewhere in another program, and then you have to drop that in, or sometimes even screenshot, right, the poem to retain the formatting, right? And yeah, so the poetry blocks aren't the best on Substack, is what I've seen. And oftentimes poems have to be left aligned if you use that too, still, or, with just the poetry block and the text typed out. And the thing about the, not typing out the text, or using, just the text and poetry block, right? Or, versus, a screenshot or an image of the, file, right, of the typed out poem, retain the formatting. So yeah, anyways, sometimes, you have to do this with Substack to retain some unique formatting, you have to, do it in another program and drop it in, and yeah, it looks like they just applied the same thing, what they did to the Instagram post, right, too. Yeah. So something really cool that they do, right, again, is the additional Q&A or interview with their bottom of the Substack, right, with the poem, above. So here you can see, right, sort of the dialogue between, right, the editor-in-chief Maria and the poet, right, Octavia. So just some example questions, you guys, if you're listening just to the audio version or not watching the videos, right? So um what is the best craft advice you ever received? So questions like that are asked to poets, right? And, poets, Maria states here, quoting this, right? Poets often talk about poetry being a practice, a way of living. How does that resonate in your daily life? So questions like that. Yeah. So, yeah. And, the editor in chief also asked things like, what do you think poetry isn't? So I think, Substack's really cool, place to do things like this, additional Q&As, interviews. A lot of lit magazine journals do this, but I think it's nice that they do it, beneath the poem. And yeah, it's very organized layout and everything. So yeah, so that's cool. And then they have reminders, right, to submit. And, they mention, right, the Gather writing community, their writing table, and, they mentioned the wait list for that. And then they have podcast episodes. So let's check out the podcast, actually, So I just wanted to share an example of one of their, Substack, publications, or one of the poems out here, right, and the interview, with Octavia Knight, right, as an example, right. You can see they have other ones here, right? And these aren't, paywalled at all, right? It doesn't look like, any here. So these are all, publicly available, right, to read, which is really great to see, right? They're not paywalling these at all. So yeah, so others can see examples of past poems published and interviews, which is really cool. So yeah, let's head back over to their website and let's take a look at the podcast now. So I really like seeing podcasts, from Lit Mags and Journals. They're a lot of fun. I'm sure you guys know. The Lit Mag I ran, right? What led up to it was actually, the start of a podcast, right? And yeah, so then, sort of branched into, right, starting Dippity, Lit Mag up, and all of that. So podcasts are really cool, right? You can do, some great chats, additional shares, right, with poets, contributors, even spoken word. A lot of different things with your podcast. It looks like with Gather, right, they're doing bi-weekly podcasts, right, where they chat with poets, right? So yeah, have their channel up here, as you can see, and yeah, Spotify as well. So yeah, that's cool. And yeah, you can see here, right, they have the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Yeah, so more than one space, which is always good to do, right? A good idea. And yeah, so you can see, right, they've done some episodes here, right? Things like, how to do an after poem the right way. Some topics are, right, motherhood, and yeah, and writing to conserve Mother Earth, right? The cycle of creativity, collecting lines at a red light, optimizing for joy, writing is architecture, writing grief, even writing the body. And yeah, the latest episode looks like the poetics of connection, and they cover visual art and poetry, the mystery of a poem. So yeah, they do a lot of different things at Gather. It looks like, right? They have the podcast, right? I've also seen, on social media, it looks like they've done retreats, other events, and then they have their, membership, right? The workshops, right? And the feedback, right? Sessions, and the feedback comments as well that they do, and the detailed feedback options. So a lot of different things they have, right? So yeah, so totally check out the Gather Poets podcast sometime if you're interested. I haven't watched the podcast myself yet or anything like that, but definitely sounds pretty cool, or looks pretty cool thus far, the topics that they're covering on this podcast. I think podcasts, again, are really fun and awesome to do because you can, again, cover different things, maybe you could do spoken word, or discuss, about certain topics in, the space or subject matter of your lit magazine journal, or the focus of it, or, things to help writers, right? Knowledge exchange, sharing, or just getting others' thoughts, in terms of poetry and different things, in terms of topics, subject matter, or, yeah. So, Gather has done some, again, cool events too, where they've had others, talk about the importance, again, of like poem titles, and, constructing a good title. I think I've seen things like that from them. And yeah. So yeah, that's the podcast they have, right? And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. They have a merch shop. Most lit mags have a merch shop. They have a mug and a sweatshirt here. So yeah, yeah, that's cool. And yeah, so yeah, my only comments again would be, the right, FAQ. I think it would be better to place that further up, right, in terms of the FAQ, and collectively somewhere, or side by side, in terms of the Gather membership FAQ, and then a separate, um, or higher up, that whole aspect of the FAQ of the Gather community, and then also some submission guidelines FAQs too, in terms of, right, the payment, what not events do you nominate for, what payment system do you leverage, right? And obviously they mention, right, Poets Worldwide, or they're open to submissions. So I like seeing that again. Not all lit magazine journals outright state that. Sometimes you have to dig through bios and see whether they accept international work. So it's not they outright say that. And yeah, and then again, our fees non-refundable, for things, the additional expedited response options, and the feedback and stuff. I think it's always good to mention that, or to specify that somewhere. Yeah, so again, I think it's really cool what they're doing. Gather is really emphasizing that they do absolutely leverage Substack quite a bit here, right? Some lit magazine journals totally, they live out on Substack, right? And then maybe they share in other places. Like Gather is, again, out on Instagram and Substack. And yeah, it's totally up to you. Again, if you want to leverage Substack in this way, if you're going to start your own lit magazine or listening to this, you can do a lot with Substack, but I think it is a good idea to have a website, separate from a Substack. The thing about having a website like Gather has, their gatherposts.com site, and then they have a separate Substack, right? They have a podcast, right? Other things, right? Of course, Substack has, features where you can, have a podcast and things like that. But I think, there are, pros and cons of doing that. Everyone has like the preferred platform, and things like that. And of course, Substack has a way you can embed audio reads and things like that, right? But I have on this podcast covered, right, an episode, right, can Substack be a home base for your lit mag? And things to take in consideration, right? So if you're curious, or you want to listen back to that, right, the audio episode of that was I think it was 14. So yeah, if you want to listen back to that, it was episode 14. Can Substack be the home base for your lit mag? And that was just the audio episode. And then if you're looking for the screen share, the video talk through, which website builder should you leverage for your lit mag or journal, right? I talk about towards the very end of that, right? Substack, Ghost, right? Which has different use cases, right? I've seen some, like Only Poems, use ghost templates for, facilitating a membership portal. Some lit mags totally have, migrated off of their website to Ghost, or some lit mags, migrated to, Substack, or started just solely on Substack too, or are just strictly on Substack. And the benefit of Substack, again, which I share in that episode, right, is that there's no cost to you to start one up, like a Substack, right? If you're gonna start up a lit mag and you want to use Substack, go for it. But I think websites offer a little bit more customization. You can plug in more things. Substack is kind of limited in terms of how much customization you can do, right? In terms of the layouts and stuff and the grids. Yeah, you can have some custom options in there in terms of with sections and stuff to feature and highlight. And yeah, but still, I think websites have further customization than Substack still to today. But Substack's awesome. I've seen a lot of lit mags and journals really find success through Substack again, and build a great sense of community around Substack too. So yeah. So to listen back to episode 72, if you're interested on, my thoughts on, my favorite website builders or ones to look at. And then towards the end of that, I talk about Substack, Ghost again, share some examples a bit further of various Substacks and Ghost setups, too. And episode 14, again, was the audio version of Substack. And yeah, and again, I think Gather, right, Lit Mag goes to show you, right? Yeah, if you want to, you can facilitate like a membership structure of some kind with Lit Mag or Journal. And again, you may have seen this if you've been following the podcast closely back in episode 80 with Only Poems, right? How they have their membership portal. And yeah, if you don't know what I'm talking about, actually, I can pull it up here again. This is additional bonus section of this episode, just PS note. So Only Poems has this membership portal again, right? And it takes you out here, right? And you can see, right, they have this. So you can set up things like this with your Lit Journal, right? I think this was a Ghost template they leveraged to facilitate this, right? You can see that, some things here, right, are showing, updates, paywall locked, membership access only, right? So, they have workshops, feedback, submissions, right? Bonus things they do here, right? And yeah, so that's something cool to check out. If you're looking to, find ways, to be able to, right, pay writers for their work, right? You have to really get creative, right? Like, I think Only Poems and Gather, right, they do a good job of showing, of striving, right, to really help others, right, through workshop sessions and giving feedback options, right, through their membership portals, right, and offering additional services, right. Of course, they always, at Gather, right, seem to have, right, their general submissions, right, window, right. They have a free reading period right now, December 1st to December 10th, which is closing really soon, guys. Again, 6 days. But after that, right, I believe this is going to change to the $5 fee, right? They're showing on Chill Subs, right, a $5 reading fee, maybe outside of this free reading period, I believe. And then Gather member submissions, right, are always open, always free. And yeah, so there are, some bonus things with the membership and being part of that. Of course, right, there are, right, if we scroll back down here, um, you know, um, the cost, right? It looks like, right, $4.99 12-week round, right? Gather is offered either as a one-time payment or 3 equal monthly installments, right? So, it's not $499 upfront, right? So you can do an installment plan of, 3, right? Which I think is, so yeah, installment plans, which is like what, 160 something bucks, right? So yeah, yeah, I think it's nice that, they're not saying you have to cough up 500 bucks up front. You could do, monthly installments, right? So, yeah, but still, not everyone may be able to afford that. I think some poets absolutely may not be able to. Even some submission fees, right, are barriers for poets to, do things, right? But it is absolutely nice that, they have free windows, absolutely. I think that's really great that they do that, so they're giving others an opportunity to submit, absolutely, these free reading periods, I think these are nice to have for lit magazine journals, right? But Absolutely, of course, on this podcast, I've tried to cover predominantly lit magazine journals that have no initial reading fee, but it's cool to see different structures and setup. What drew me to Gather was, I think, their name, right? And I was thinking about the holiday season and how others gather around a table again. So again, they're not a Christmas focused or holiday season lit mag, but that word comes up a lot again around Thanksgiving, Christmas time too. And I think, yeah, when poets gather together, writers in general, right, it's very powerful and awesome. A lot of cool things can happen with those chats, discussions, and that whole aspect again of helping one another, right, and feedback sessions, providing additional services. I think again is a great way to cover operational expenses. I myself have been thinking about maybe doing something to this nature, right, additional membership options or additional more services, right, beyond just maybe what currently I've done, right, with my own lit mag. But I've shared in this podcast, I think even Seaside Gothic had a interesting Patreon setup where they had some free samples to read, and then the others were behind a wall where you have to choose a subscription, right, tier through Patreon, right. So some lit magazine journals have that, right. And I think Seaside Gothic, well, that was episode 90, right. Yeah. So yeah, so I'd recommend listening back to those episodes, Only Poems, and also that was 80, and then Seaside Gothic was episode 90. So yeah, there are a couple other episodes where I share some lit magazine journals with some pretty unique setups like that, so yeah, totally dig back in the episodes. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. I think I've covered all the pages on Gather and the guidelines and their website. So again, I think if someone were to see that waitlist pop up and the banner, right, I think it could be potentially confusing to others unless they scroll down further, read more about it, or maybe they saw on social media, maybe the call, right, the free reading period that they had open. They might confuse it for the sense that, oh, they might say, oh, you have to wait to submit. No, that's not what it is at all, right? It's the whole aspect of they have this additional Gather membership, right, where they do some really cool and awesome, workshop sessions and things like that. And yeah, it takes a lot of time to do those, right? They're paying, right, the guest speakers and things of that nature, it looks like. So there are costs with facilitating workshops and things like that, events. And yeah, I think it's really cool again that they are, they've started up that Gather anthology this year. So that's cool. Yeah. So totally, check it out and pick it up, when I don't know when the release date is on that, but I think it's on their social media. It says coming soon, December 2025. So I think it's just around the corner, about to be available to others to pick up. So totally check it out and read more of Gather. Check out their Substack too, their YouTube channel, podcast, right? Gather Poets podcast. I see less and less maybe using Spotify this year personally myself. So, YouTube, I think, is a great platform for lit magazine journalists to leverage aside from Substack. Yeah, Substack has, podcasts and video capabilities. It supports that. But I see more so being geared towards really, sticking to, in terms of the lit mag space, I see a lot more in terms of, sharing published pieces, Q&As, interviews, research, but not necessary. I've seen some do videos and podcasts there too and plug them in. Um, Again, it's tough to manage multiple spaces to share work in or publish work in as a lit mag or journal or founding editor even or team. So you want to stick to maybe a couple platforms, right? Not every single platform. It's hard to be on every single platform and post consistently. But yeah, it looks like Gather really focuses on Substack and Instagram. And then they have additional workshop sessions, Zoom meetings, table events, right, where everyone gets together virtually, right, through the Gather membership, right, and there is like the monthly, right, installments, the upfront time payment you can do option, right, 499. So yeah. Anyways, that's pretty much it, and yeah, always a good idea again, and yeah, again, they are a CLMP member. So if you're interested in, learning about that and you're looking to start your own lit mag journal, listening to this, right, do check out the CLMP, episode I did, right, which was episode 82. And there was another episode too, but that was just the audio version of it, I think, episode 16, but episode 82 was the full coverage episode on CLMP, right, and the benefits of being a member. And yeah, so on CLMP, right, it says, charges writers a submission reading fee. It says no. But on chill subs, I think it might confuse someone, right? They see this, right? The reading fee is $5. So, I hope chill subs has like a hover on this where, it, has the exceptions over this, like publishes reprints, right? They're specifying again, social media, right, is the exception, right, of that, right? Allowing social media to be poems to be, submitted, yeah. So, yeah, published on personal social media sites is fine, right? That's the exception, right? But they want previously uncurated work, right? Yeah. So yeah, just keep that in mind. But yeah, it's awesome. They pay writers for work, right? $35, 35 Canadian dollars. And yeah, so that's cool. I think what Gather's doing, and they really seem to emphasize community and their memberships, the sessions they're doing are really unique. I think there is absolutely value in that, yeah, it's hard, I think pricing workshops and sessions, again, they're paying, right, the guest speakers, and it looks like too, and facilitating that. There are costs with doing that. So, yeah, I think, there are a lot of whenever you do feedback and sessions like that, right, they have, testimonials, they have, others stating what they got out of it. So that's great to see, that feedback from others on the workshops and sessions they've done, thus far. So yeah, it's cool what they're doing. And yeah, just a couple things I mentioned in the podcast, right? It'd be nice to know if those are like regular recurring, like free reading periods, September and December, like those months, like, those 10 days it looks like, or not, because that wasn't clear to me. And then like just maybe relocating the FAQ, I think, and a few more things with like submission guidelines, FAQ. I don't know. Those were the things that came to my mind. But the website's really easy, and the layout, to everything's, clear, to me. You just have to scroll through and read through further, right? About the membership, the waitlist, what that entails. And, they of course have their general submission windows, the free reading period. And then it looks like after that, right, there's a $5 fee outside of that for non-members. And, the Gather community, right, that they have the additional benefits of that, and they offer still expedited response options to that as well. So yeah, you got to be, again, as I said earlier, right, just repeating this again, you got to be creative in coming up with other ways to offset costs. And this is something, with the Lit Mag I run, right, we really haven't dabbled a bunch into a ton of additional services or offering workshops and events like that. I guess this is something, the Lit Mag Lab, I started to really do that in a sense, offer an additional resource to help others of some kind, an extension, but of some sort. But it's not, like umbrellaed into our website, anything to date, this podcast or series to that nature extent. But I thought about maybe doing some kind of membership portal of some kind with my own Lit Mag journal. I think it is a great way to offer additional services, fun things, for others who really, enjoy, the Lit Mag journal, right, to partake in events, virtual meetups, I think are very cool, too. So, yeah. So anyways, yeah, everything's very organized on their site, and the layout, right, they have a search, and yeah, so it is pretty straightforward. Just a couple of things I mentioned, right? And yeah, they do, it looks like, nominate work as well, for various events. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. I can't think of anything else in terms of Gather. Yeah, so I hope you guys got something out of this episode, and I think they have a pretty unique structure, right? Yeah, again, right, they have a certain amount of poems they're publishing every month, right? 4 poems a month on Instagram, and yeah, and on Substack, right? 2 from their Gather, right, community members, right, and then 2 from their general submissions, right, window. So yeah, that's something to think about, again, for Lit Magazine Journal. Like, how many pieces are you going to publish every month? Or, a lot of Lit Magazine journals, I think, typically just try to publish as many pieces throughout the year, as many as they can. But some Lit Mags, totally, they have caps and things of that nature in terms of submission volume, on the back end with their system. Or rather, they, publish a certain amount of poems every month, or have a very, they have a set schedule they stick to, right? So yeah, anyways, that's Gather Lit Mag. Yeah, so totally check out again more of the work they published. And yeah, they have again Instagram, YouTube, podcast. So yeah, give it a read sometime, guys, and pick up maybe even that cool print anthology they have on the way. I think it's a very cool lit mag in existence. And yeah, just wanted to share my thoughts, stopping by their site. Again, what drew me to that, I was thinking about the holiday season, but they're not a holiday lit mag at all. But nevertheless, I think there is a value out of gathering together, right? Absolutely. And community focused lit magazine journals. I love seeing that. So, yeah, I think it's something to think about. If you start your own lit mag journal, maybe diving into additional services or membership options of some kind, tiers. Yeah, a lot of lit magazine journals have subscription things, and things they've done with Patreon, again, Seaside Gothic, things like that. Only Poems, I think Gather, Lit Mag have really, focused quite a bit on, additional services and membership options, right? So, totally, check it out a little bit further, more than what I've covered on this podcast. I tried to cover as much as possible, or every page that I saw, right? And yeah, so again, they're pretty much, it looks like, open, from what I gather, they're pretty much, always open throughout the year. What I was saying, right, really is I don't know about those free reading periods, if those are recurring, right? Those particular months I was seeing, right, September and December, right? That's the only thing, right, that I was thinking about, right? You can see here, right? Again, right? September 1st, September 10th, and December 1st, December 10th. I don't know if these are are going to be their regular windows, for that, the free reading periods, or if these are going to vary or change. So that's the only thing. I think it might be good to maybe specify that on their website somewhere. But in either case, yeah, everything's pretty straightforward. They are, again, they're not saying the poems have to be themed or anything of that nature. And yeah, they do have, a line limit, right? No more than 30 lines, right? They typically only publish poems with no more than 30 lines. That's their preference, absolutely. So yeah, be mindful about that. Yeah, I've totally myself have interacted with lit magazine journals, right? They'll outright reject pieces if you're, going way over their line limit, or nowhere near it, or you're just outside of it even. So you want to be very mindful about line limits, for formatting purposes that lit mags have. They don't mention anything about, font styles and things like that. But of course, choose a font, right, and size that's, easy to read. I think, again, some lit magazine journals outright on their site specify some subject matter and topics they absolutely don't want to see. Of course, a common one on the episodes we've seen is, right, nothing overly graphic. So they don't necessarily outright state that anywhere on their site, but I'm sure every lit magazine journal has things they absolutely maybe don't want to see, or some lit magazine journals outright mention to put trigger warnings and things of that nature, and some don't. So it varies, but just some additional things. So yeah, anyways, that's really cool. Again, they do pay writers to work. This could change over time, of course, payments and stuff with lit magazine journals, and the reading periods, or fees and stuff of that nature, outside of that free reading period window. And yeah, and membership, structures and programs, sometimes they adjust, right, the amounts of those, the things with Gather, right? But yeah, this is how it's structured as of, December 2025, when I'm making a pit stop on the website and their guidelines and everything. So yeah, totally, they're a CLMP member, right? And we scroll down, we can see, right, the masthead is visible, so that's great to see again. But yeah, part of that being, right, you get a submittable discount, right? And yeah, so again, totally, I'd recommend, again, as always, I mentioned multiple times podcast, there are alternatives to submittable out there, I think, that have some really beneficial features too. So yeah, like Subfolio, and yeah, a couple other ones I shared on this podcast. So do check it out. Something to note, right, again, I just mentioned this earlier, right? So I don't think they updated this, right. So this was like a past reading period, right, that they had September 1st to September 10th. So again, I don't know if these are always going to be their go-to months for free reading periods, but I think it'd be nice to note that. But yeah, it looks like they are, pretty much open, um, yeah, throughout the year. And yeah, it says So for general submission, it says please wait 6 months before submitting again, right? And yeah, that's just something to note, right? I think, right, for gather members, right, it says, right, if they've declined your submission, please wait 1 month before submitting again. And yeah, so yeah, and if we decline your submission, it says, may submit again in 1 month. So yeah, I think that portion on the website. So I think this portion on the website here wasn't updated quite yet, in terms of, the reading period, right? Because the current reading period is actually December, right? 1st to 10th, right? 2025 for the free reading period. And yeah. And then I think it'd be nice if they specified out after that free reading period, right? For non-members, right? It's $5, right? Yeah. And yeah, so that's the only thing. And yeah, so I think it says here, please wait 6 months before submitting again. So I think it doesn't match up to what is quite here in submittable, right? It says if we decline your submission, you may submit again in 1 month, right? And then if you have accepted work, right, it says wait 12 months again. So maybe that portion on the website further down wasn't updated quite yet, but that happens sometimes. Lit mags sometimes have a lot going on. It takes a bit to update parts of the site. Yeah, that's the only thing. Just pointing out, and a couple things. So take care, guys. Check out more Gather Lit Mag, yeah. And I think what they're doing is really cool, and the workshop sessions seem to be really valuable. I think workshops and sessions in general are pretty valuable. Knowledge exchanging, sharing with others, and dissecting work and feedback. Getting feedback I think is so important again. To grow as a writer, and, I think a lot of poets and writers really struggle with that, getting honest feedback till today. So I like seeing lit magazine journals that offer that in some way or form. Of course, in most cases, what I've seen, again, is what lit magazine journals, right, do. They have additional, right, fees for that, or maybe a membership, for more one-on-one feedback, sessions and stuff. So yeah, some lit mags do have free feedback windows too, and things like that. But every lit mag journal structured a little bit differently, but there are some similarities, sometimes, in terms of that, the structures and stuff. So that's pretty much it. Yeah. Take care, guys. Officially signing off now. Yeah. P.S. guys, here's my additional note just tacked on, which I do with nearly all episodes. I know you're like, how long is the episode? So just one last thing, I promise. So, yeah, just circling back to something I said in episode 97, right? The telltale signs of, scam, lit magazine journals, or ones that aren't on the up and up, right? So, something that some out there, right, what they do is, recycle, right? Canned feedback. And, some writers may be like, oh, this feedback looks exactly like what I got from another writer, right? And they just changed a couple words here and there, right? That sort of indicates, right, that either the lit manga journal doesn't really care, or maybe didn't take the time at all to really do custom detailed feedback, or even may have never even read the work, or anything like that. And yeah, maybe just we're out to get, money from feedback fee, additional feedback, service fees, right? And yeah, so I really love seeing that, Gather Lit Mag and a few others that I've shared right through this channel, right, and elsewhere, shares testimonials and, yeah, feedback on the sessions, the work they're doing, through the Gather community. And yeah, so that's really great to see. Again, it looks like they have a really extensive, library that they've, created, right, for the sessions, right, the workshops and everything, that others can really dig into, when or if they become a member, right, and yeah, looks like the wait list is typically super long, pretty, packed. But I think that goes to show you that there is absolutely a lot of value others are seeing from what they're doing. The interest is there in these types of structures, right? Workshops and sessions, and really getting a chance to have really, maybe one-on-one feedback, from others, and dissecting work like that in that manner. It's really, personalized feedback, right? It's not just like something canned or recycled, which some lit mags or journals out there do, which aren't on the up and up, right? Or aren't, like doing things like that, which is pretty horrendous to do, right? So yeah, I love seeing that they seems like they are doing that, really giving really thoughtful, personalized feedback and doing these sessions and additional things. Even right, they offer to general submissions, right, that additional optional feedback, right? There is a fee to do that, but yeah, they're taking time, to do that. And yeah, it's yeah, not all lit magazine journals do that at all, or any things like this, like these the structure of this. So I think that's pretty cool, the different things that Gather has going on. And again, community, I think, is so important in general, right? In a lot, not just in the lit mag world, but in general, right, in different fields and things like that. It seems like Gather has established like a great additional support system for writers and poets, and really taking the time to be there for others. That mentorship is really great to see. I myself, perhaps, I don't know if I'm considered a writing mentor or poetry mentor, but I've done more so, I think, in the IT world, things like that, where others shadow me and I mentor others in terms of technology and stuff. But I think, again, there's value from that, mentorship in general, and yeah, and things of that nature. So, others can really learn from one another, can learn, right, from a mentor, or really just serve as someone who can really be there for someone, to talk with, to chat with, to really again, it's a great. Same thing can be said about like CLMP, right? The CLMP membership, right? They have a number of sessions and virtual meetups they do across the year that seem to be really helpful. I've watched some of CLMP's recordings now and then and things like that, in terms of the ones that were available that I found. So yeah, but absolutely there is value from those, and even things like that for founding editors, right? Sessions of that nature that CLMP does. So totally, check that out too. And yeah, if you're a writer, maybe looking for something to that extent, workshops, or really looking for feedback, it may be worth it to invest in something like this, like a membership of some kind, to get additional support and a network, right? Generative writing sessions, fun writing prompts. I think writing prompts are really fun, and challenges like that. And it looks like they offer video formats, and live feedback, to even to a feedback hour. I think that's really cool. So they have a lot of different ways you can seems to get help, or get support, through Gather, Litmag. So that's it. Yeah, so I think Maria's created a pretty cool Litmag, so totally check it out. Again, obviously, we would all love Litmag journals to have zero fees and things of that nature, but I think what they created, yeah, other lit magazine journals I've seen out there have a structure like this, right? Free reading periods. So it's pretty typical, and additional, feedback, paid, and, expedite options, as an option, right? Fees there, optional, right? Not required. But yeah, so I think, again, yeah, it's a pretty neat lit mag. So just wanted to take the time to share it with you guys. I think it's a pretty cool lit mag out there in existence. So just wanted to share it with you guys. So I thought that was great to see Gather Right was founded, out of Canada, and that they are really, you know, emphasizing a worldwide, community, right? And submission opportunities are open to everyone, it looks like, right? So yeah, they do have, again, those free reading windows. Sometimes that can change with lit magazine journals again, or they dissolve that or change their structure and pricing and membership stuff in terms of that. But that's, again, what it is as of currently to date. And yeah, so that's basically it. Oh, yeah. So one more thing. So on Duotrope, right, if you go on Gather Lit Mag, something Duotrope does, I think that's nice. They have an AI policy field here, right? So it says unknown AI policy. So I am going to assume, right, just again, I said this on the podcast multiple times, right? Most lit magazine journals I know in existence, right, they have a no AI work accepted policy, right? So I think they may just want to go in and specify that, right, in an FAQ page somewhere, or in their guideline area, just somewhere on their site, to just state that. I know for some it may seem obvious to others, but I think it can help minimize that, yeah, in some way or form, in terms of like, yeah, some lit magazine journals get flooded with a bunch of AI submissions. It happens. We've heard from others in the community. I've seen comments and things from founding editors blog posts that they got spammed with a lot of artwork or AI submissions that they discovered later on. So I don't know, it's just a good idea always to state nowadays an AI policy, even if it's just like one line, just somewhere. It's a good idea, right? So it says unknown AI policy, so you just want to be mindful about that. As I shared, just a episode back, right? Christmas, right? Spirits, right? Mentioned about, no AI work at all, no AI artwork, right? No AI writing. So obviously, right? I'm going to assume with Gather too, right? They want, human work, right? That's what I'm thinking, just because, only poems, strange pilgrims, right? They have those policies in place, right? Where it states, right, they don't want to see AI generated work at all. So I'm going to assume Gathers on, right, the same page with that too. Their partners, right, that they have discounts with on some things too. So that's just something to think about, right? You just want to specify that. So I would love to see maybe in their menu FAQ section dedicated to a combo or separation between the Gather membership FAQ and then the submission guidelines FAQ, or it could be centrally like on a page too, which might be easier. Just all general questions tied to everything Gather. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I just wanted to point that out because I didn't see that anywhere on their site, and Duotrope did have it right here, right? That was unknown, but obviously, Lit Mags, right, just starting out, right? I think they just launched fairly recently, I think, right? It was showing 2025, right? But I think there have been members part of Gather since way back, maybe since it says 2024 quite a bit. Current members. Yeah, sometimes it takes to get a lot of lit magazine journals, they oftentimes iron out their website a couple different times over the years, is what I've seen. I do that too. So just something to note, towards the very end here, I tack on additional thoughts and things. So that was all I wanted to add. So take care, guys, and totally check out Gather Lit Mag again. Yeah.